Ben, how's it going?
Not too bad. How's your morning so far?
It's actually 10 p.m. for me. I'm in Thailand right now, so
Oh shit,
it's
where in Thailand are you?
I'm in Phuket.
Oh, awesome,
Yeah,
awesome.
have you
I
been?
was there. Yeah, I was there twice. I was there in 2016 and then like way back in 2007.
Yeah, just vacation, or were you traveling around for a while, or?
First one was just kind of like a backpacking trip, and I was up from Australia. And the second one, I got married in Bali, and then me and my wife went around Southeast Asia for like 5 months.
Nice, man, nice. Yeah, I've been here
Yeah,
for in this. I've been here a couple times, but this stint I've been here for 4 months and just doing some Muay Thai
nice.
training, living by the beach. Just enjoying a bit of
That's
time.
awesome.
Um,
Yeah, that's great.
so Ben, first of all, thanks for taking the time. I know I reached out to you
Yeah,
cold, and I don't know if you saw any of the stuff I did before, but I'm not used to this
I did.
format at all. So I usually do sit down, face to face sort of style interviews with people. So if we have any tech difficulties here, if there's a lag, just let me know and we'll work around it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, Ben. So like I said, I don't know if you saw the other stuff I've done before, but this show I've been involved in or interested in Bitcoin since sub a dollar. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't an investor at that time, like everybody else. But I started doing interviews in 2015, just kind of when they
Mhm.
came about, just out of pure interest. And being that I'm in Thailand right now, it's kind of hard to go and meet these people and set up face-to-face interviews. But I still want to, there's so much going on in the space. There always is, but it seems to be snowballing all the
Mhm.
time. And I just have this craving to talk to as many people as I can, of course, to further my understanding. But I think we might
Mhm.
have an affinity here. Is also you end up having so many conversations with people about this stuff because you're just super into it. You're super excited by it, and some people are interested, but you get a lot of kind of blank faces or brick walls, or that initial gap is such a funny thing. Some people get it and they
Mhm.
dive in, and some people don't. And so what I want this podcast to be is kind of a way for people to access some of the basics by people that have been involved in the industry, experts, entrepreneurs, etc., answering kind of basic questions just so that they
Mhm.
can kind of like get a sense for what people who know about this stuff are thinking about it. And
Yeah.
then the other aspect of this show and the format, and it very well may change if it doesn't work out, but I think the crypto space and Bitcoin space is filled with interesting personalities. You being one of them, and a laundry list of others. And I think the kind of human interest piece of seeing all these different interesting people answer the same questions and seeing where they diverge or where they overlap will be interesting as well.
Yeah.
Now, if at any point you want to elaborate on something or back and forth, you can chime in. But the format of the
Yeah.
initial part will just be kind of like I'll ask a question, you answer it, and
Yeah.
there's 20 of them, and then at the end there's a couple word associations, and then we'll just have a general chat if you have the time at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Good to go.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I guess the first one is one of the more common ones is that if you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or an 80-year-old elderly or something like that, how would you frame it? What would you say?
Uh, I would say that, uh, if let's say my grandma's used to a traditional bank, I would say, well, all that the bank is doing is just keeping track of who owns what money, and you're trusting them to make sure that the record is kept straight and they're not lying about who owns what. Well, with Bitcoin, it's just a big record that everybody has a copy of that gets updated every time anybody spends money. So it just kind of democratizes. The keeping of that record. Um, and I wouldn't go too much further than that for my grandmother,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean that's the basics of it, and it's I guess the separation of money and government.
right. I can already tell there's going to be more back and forth here than I anticipated, but I just want to comment on that quickly because it's one of those things where, and I think that's a perfectly adequate answer for the question that
Mhm.
was posed. But it's one of those things that when I hear myself explaining it sometimes, I can see the lack of there's no wow factor for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'll say something and I'll try to explain it the best I can, and I'll kind of see that it's not landing really. It's kind of like, well, okay, so it's a bank without the bank, or it's.
Yeah.
And I think much of this has to do with understanding the inherent problems in the legacy system, and that's what kind of
Yeah.
generates the interest and demand for what Bitcoin is. But anyways, we'll move on. Why is Bitcoin important or interesting to you?
For me, it's kind of the disruptive nature of it. It takes responsibility and kind of this control out of the hands of centralized entities like governments and central banks, and it places it in the hands of people. It's kind of this empowering tool for individuals to be able to have control of their own monetary future for the first time in, well, I mean, in a lot of our lifetimes.
Yeah. What is your contribution to the space, and what is the most exciting aspect of the work that you do?
My goal from the beginning has been to try and break down complex topics into their lowest common denominator so that they're accessible for brand new people into the space. And so for me, some of the most exciting moments, other than meeting some of the people that I've been looking up to for years, is when I see a comment or I meet somebody in person and they say, "Hey, what you did actually helped me understand this, and it really set me on my path of discovery." You got me?
Yep. Um, how long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more, and then after that purchase it? If you're willing to
So
divulge
I
that information.
Yeah, yeah, that's okay. So I started hearing about it in 2013, kind of the beginning of 2013, and I think I saw a few headlines and articles through the year, and that got me interested. But every single time I saw the price, I thought, "Oh man, missed the boat on that one."
Right.
It wasn't until the end of 2013 where I really started reading. That's when it had that big bubble up to around $1,200, and so I started reading. I did about 3 months of reading before I started to actually dabble and download a wallet and play around with 20, 30, 40, $50 here and there, just to start to learn the basics. So yeah, it was a solid 3 months of actually diving in and trying to understand before I ever actually touched it myself.
Yeah. And where were you coming from? What was the interest within you that kind of Bitcoin peaked? Was it a libertarian bent? Was it were you a gold bug? Like, what was it initially that really kind of sparked your interest in Bitcoin when you heard about it?
I think for myself and a number of people, obviously the speculation aspect of it was initially attractive,
Right.
but then upon doing some reading, it became more of the disruption and the turning everything that we know on its head. It made me ask questions about what money was,
Hmm.
and and I don't can't really explain it because it wasn't really an area that I was involved in before, but it kind of opened my eyes to things that I had never had interest in before. And because of that, for the first time ever, I started saving. I was a terrible saver before, and just those two things kind of snowballed, and I started to realize, oh, I was bad at saving because for me, saving never did anything, and now I'm saving in an asset that is, I guess, deflationary in nature,
Right.
and I started to actually benefit from it, and it just kind of changed my entire worldview
Right.
once I dove into Bitcoin.
Yeah. Once you went down that rabbit hole, I'm actually going to jump ahead to another question now because I think it's related. But a lot of people will report that being involved in Bitcoin, investing in it, being in the community somehow changes their behavior in multiple ways. Now, you just mentioned that you became more of a saver, right? And so people start developing a lower time preference and they start thinking like, well, I could buy that pack of beer or I could stack however many sats, and that seems like a way better use of my funds. I can go without beer, but what's that going to be worth in 5 years or in 10 years or whatever? Are there any other ways that like your behavior has noticeably changed since you've gotten involved, other than like a career that you're obviously building, but your personal behavior has changed?
Yeah, I think I, when I first got into Bitcoin, I we'll say politically, I was very, very um, close-mindedly left-leaning.
Right.
I'll say, and it was mostly from a social standpoint, and in a lot of ways, I still am socially left of center. But fiscally, I started looking at monetary policy, and it made me open up to actually listen to some concepts from the right side of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think politically, it's just made me a lot more open-minded, and I take into account both sides of the political spectrum much more now than I ever did before.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I'd never, I think that's a similar process has probably happened with me as well. I would have described myself as left of center before, and then after that, some libertarian elements, some Austrian elements in terms of economics, and that whole spiel. But it's interesting that Bitcoin seems to be kind of like causing a convergence of you're kind of picking the most sensible elements of both sides and it's kind of smashing them in. And for some reason, it's happening around this thing that Bitcoin is. Now maybe it's because of the kind of governance that it inspires, or like the architecture of the governance of Bitcoin. Maybe that inspires thinking about other forms of governance and the monetary policy and all that kind of stuff. But it's just fascinating to think. Everyone thinks that people are involved in Bitcoin either because they're nerds or they want to make a ton of money speculating on it. But it's so interesting, the social change that it's causing on an individual level for people that start interacting with it and learning about it.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that it's driven a culture of it doesn't matter who you are, it just matters about the quality of your ideas.
Yeah.
And some people may take that as offensive because people can be very dismissive of an idea that they look at and it doesn't line up with kind of the ethos of Bitcoin as they've grown to know it. And because of that, people can come into the space and feel it's very abrasive, but really it tends to be people just saying what they think right off the bat.
Yeah, I love it. Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
Can it be stopped? I've never been more aware of the possible problems with Bitcoin, but I've also never been more confident that it won't be stopped. So
you got to unpack that contrast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first got involved in Bitcoin, I got the bullet points, and I thought, oh, it's unstoppable. And the more I read, the more I realized, oh, there's actually a ton of things that could go wrong here. I learned about what 51% attacks were. I learned about the fact that there's still many undiscovered and discovered bugs in the code base that are still being worked on. I learned about threats from governments, things like that. But the thing is, as I learned about that, a ton of time has passed, and none of those things have been successfully executed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always looked at it and said, well, the longer it's around and becomes immune to these things, or the more of these things that it faces down and just brushes off, the more likely it is to succeed. So could it be stopped? Sure, I suppose. But barring a catastrophic bug, a systematic worldwide crackdown that every single government simultaneously agrees to, the turning off of the internet, or an EMP that somehow envelops the entire globe, I just don't see it happening. Even in the case of that worldwide government crackdown, it would still exist. Things still exist, right, in spite of regulation. So really, I'm very, very doubtful that something other than just a catastrophic bug would take down Bitcoin. And even in that instance, I think there would be a an emergency fork to fix it. It would just delay what I think will end up being a
Inevitable.
form of hyper Bitcoinization.
Right. So I'll ask a follow up on that, and that is, given that you feel that way, do you think? I think two ways about this. One is that it'll be kind of like a rolling capitulation, where successively larger societal entities kind of confront with it, recognize it's something that is not in the legacy interest, but then very quickly after that realize, well, this is not something that we can really stop. We better get on board before, and so on and so forth. And that happens all the way up to whatever the largest power structure or control structure there is. Or there's significant, persistent resistance at every step of the way, and there's not so much capitulation as there is confrontation. Are you in one camp or the other there?
Yeah, I don't think it will be a sudden overnight kind of we tear down the system kind of thing. I think it will be more gradual than most people believe. And when it does kind of take hold and becomes a mainstay, it will kind of work its way into our system, and people that are younger may not even really appreciate the change that has taken place
Right.
because they've just always been this way. So yeah, I think there'll obviously be some major pushback from central banks, but if central banks end up being replaced, then I think other institutions like existing just regular traditional banks will just start to institute services based around Bitcoin, and people will have their choice whether or whether not to utilize them.
Right.
It'll be just a gradual change, and people will just kind of go with the flow as it happens and benefit over time.
And so when you say something like hyper Bitcoinization, what in your mind does that mean or look like?
So to me, that becomes an instance where our entire monetary base eventually starts to become sound money like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin becoming that kind of sound money base layer of value from which uh, most online value is derived from.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're pegging certain things to the Bitcoin blockchain, people start to use it in their day-to-day life, even if they don't realize they're using the Bitcoin blockchain in a way, it still becomes entrenched in our entire society in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
I think that will come gradually, but I think that regular use as a store of value is the first step along the way.
Right. What is your comeback when people call Bitcoin a fraud, a fake, otherwise dismiss it outright? Do you engage? Do you just say, do you just smile? What's your
Uh,
comeback?
well, a lot of the time I find people that just throw out terms like that aren't interested in even having the conversation.
Right.
They just want to throw out their piece. If they genuinely want to engage, then I'll have the conversation and I'll say, well, things like, well, it's been around for 10 years. You can do a lot of things with it. I've lived on Bitcoin. I know many people, including myself in some instances, that get paid in Bitcoin. And you may just be kind of hearing some of the mainstream media scare tactics
Mm-hmm.
and taking those too much to heart. And I just typically I try not to over engage people like that. I just say, well, take a look at this bit of information or take a look at this because you may have been misled by somebody in the media that has a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. So I try to frame it as not you're an idiot for thinking the way you are.
Right.
I frame it as maybe somebody's feeding you bad information. It's worth it to take a look because somebody may have taken advantage of you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach, but I'm always fascinated. And look, we may be wrong. We may be on the wrong side. Obviously, we don't
Yeah.
feel that way, but we may be. And I'm always fascinated. I try to dig in when I find those people. And like you said, if it's just a total shutdown, there's no point. But if there's strong resistance, but like the door is open a crack, or if they've already been converted. I'm interested in knowing like what switch flipped. Like what was the thing that made you either question your existing held beliefs, or what did you learn about it that sets you off on thinking a different way and somehow, like that, because that's the turning point, and that's the really interesting
Yeah.
part where people change their minds.
And I think that that's likely the most difficult thing to figure out because it differs so much from person to person,
Right.
and you really have to know your audience, right? If you know if somebody's a gold bug, you need to talk about it to them completely differently than somebody who's just a libertarian, or somebody who's coming at it from somebody who's super left wing versus super right wing, or somebody who likes to speculate in stocks or likes real estate. You have to think about what their interests are,
Hmm.
what their pain points are, and then talk about those particular pain points.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I know it's early where you are. Did you catch the Pomp and Schiff debate?
I have not yet, and I'm debating in my head whether or not I even want to watch it.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I really like Peter Schiff
Uh-huh.
on everything except Bitcoin. And I've just found that lately all his stuff is Bitcoin related, which I just don't agree with him on, and I think he's kind of got the blinders on because he's incentivized to think that way.
Yeah.
But all his talk about the economy, even though he's he's been calling for a crash forever now.
Hmm.
He will eventually be right. But I think his concerns about the underlying infrastructure are spot on. It's
Sure.
just that our institutions are very, very good at kicking the can down the road
Yeah.
through any means necessary.
Well, this is why I ask. Of course, because it happened so recently. But you were talking about what kind of road to go down with people based on what their interests are, what their kind of worldview is on investing or government or other things like that. And I agree. And it's just always so funny when you find someone who's seemingly like so much on the same page. And look, I've been following Peter for probably more than 15 years. And Jim Rogers, and I've interviewed Jim, and basically the same shtick, invest in commodities and gold and silver because the world is going to melt, But like you
Yeah.
said, they've been saying that for 15 plus years. Um, and it's so, again, I'm fascinated by like what the sticking point is, because like, everything else seems to suggest that you see the problem so clearly that you think it would inspire excitement, interest, intrigue, further research on what seems to be a very viable potential solution to all the things that you're accurately, or in my opinion, accurately seeing. But
Mhm.
like you said, seems like there's some kind of a wall. Anyways, I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
be kind of frustrated with the debate. It's more of the same. Um, what do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on the lives of individuals, politics, and economy prosperity?
So when it comes to individuals, I think, and I hope it's kind of an effect like it's had on me, where it spurs me into thinking for the long term and doing more saving and being more financially conscious. Because as I said before Bitcoin, I was terrible with my money. I didn't save, and I didn't even really understand what money was. So I hope it kind of spurs those conversations and topics between regular, everyday people that normally would never have any interest in that. I hope they become more fiscally responsible, even if they don't know why.
Yeah.
I hope and think that will happen in the presence of sound money. Um, when it comes to, sorry, what were the
The other one
other
was
couple
just
of,
on society and governance, or politics rather.
yeah,
Yeah.
politics?
And the last
Politics
one
is a,
was economics and prosperity, like growth.
okay. So politics is a tough one because in essence, Bitcoin is such a low time preference asset, and it encourages those types of behaviors. Whereas, say, for instance, in the US, the term limits on a lot of politicians very much incentivize high time preference thinking.
Right.
Let's blow this money now and get some shiny things for my constituents,
Right.
so that I can get reelected next cycle. And
And then I'm out
I
before it
don't
comes to roost, right? Like
yeah,
I'm gone.
yeah, and that's I think that's also the issue with election cycles is a lot of the time the implications of what was done in a previous administration don't come to fruition
Right.
until the next administration or the next candidate is well into their term, and people don't associate that time differential of what was done and what has happened because of it. They look at what's currently happening
Sure.
and what is currently being done by who's in power, and they associate those two things. But it tends to not, the correlation is actually lagging there.
Right.
So yeah, that's a tough one because I think you'll continue to see that high time preference from politicians, and it's going to mesh even less with a low time preference asset as our underlying monetary system.
Hmm.
Uh, where poor decisions there will not go well together. And then as far as just general, uh, I guess economics and the way society kind of is impacted from this, that'll be an interesting one because yeah, it's kind of tough to say, but I think society in general, it'll start to shift towards more of a long term kind of we need to get back to individuals. But as far as products being created, as far as businesses go, when people are building, they're going to be building for the long term because you already have a monetary base
Hmm.
that if it continues to be successful, will just naturally appreciate in purchasing power. And so any capital allocated outside of that, you're betting that it will grow faster than the purchasing power of the money itself. And so
Right.
I think society as a whole will benefit from that because money will be allocated in ventures that merit capital.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And just to go back to the individual impact for a second, I've always been super frugal and super careful with money and stuff like that. So that element of Bitcoin didn't really, and I've always been interested in investing and that kind of stuff. So it didn't really impact me that much. But as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking, the millennial generation gets a lot of flack, right? And some probably rightly so, and some maybe it's a little bit harsh. But, one of the characteristics of that generation might be a certain amount of apathy in many different domains. And so that may have been, or that may be a reason why, so many people don't plan that much for the future, kind of spend their money on things that are wasteful or just consumables or what have you. And not that that's all bad, like going to Burning Man or something like that is probably wonderful, but in day-to-day life. And it's interesting to consider and possibly even watch the way that maybe Bitcoin is giving a whole generation hope about the future where maybe it was insufficient or lacking previously, where most millennials, maybe they weren't going to buy a home, maybe they weren't going to have a investment fund. They weren't going to be in the stock market. They just kind of felt they missed out, and so why not just fucking ride this bitch into the sun, But maybe
Yeah.
I kind of get the sense, right when you were saying that Bitcoin might be dragging this generation out of that way of thinking and providing them hope, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, 100%. And it again, it won't be an overnight thing, but
Sure.
even just now, like I think of I've got my daughter is 2 now. And so she's always existed in a world where Bitcoin existed. She will never have known a world where she didn't have a choice of
Right.
currency.
It's
And
powerful.
so she's going to grow up, and what I plan on doing is when she does chores or gets allowance or whatever, for the first little bit, I'm going to divide up her allowance between dollars and Bitcoin, and a portion of it will always go into some saving,
Right.
and then she can contrast and compare and decide for herself what she wants to do
That's
later on.
interesting.
But I mean, I think honestly, there's going to be an entire generation of people saying, okay, I've got $100 in my bank account, and then I've got $100 worth of Bitcoin here, and they leave it, and they see what happens a year, 2 years, 3 years out of with their purchasing power, and they start to clue in as to what is good money and what is inflated crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to say that's one of the more exciting aspects of this whole phenomenon to me. New money is awesome, but just the kind of unexpected. I'm sure some really smart, people thought that this sort of phenomenon would happen, but just seeing these less expected outcomes starting to pop up, it's cool.
Yeah.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to their reserves?
Ooh. I'm curious if some haven't
Yeah,
already.
right.
Yeah. But publicly, I think it'll take a few years. In fact, you know what I think is more likely to happen is you get something that is either Libra or something Libra-like,
Yeah.
where you have I guess, independent of a central bank, even though I mean Libra is coming in like a consortium of such. But they're a basket of fiat currencies. If certain fiat currencies start underperforming, what happens when they start to sub in one of those fiat currencies for Bitcoin?
Right.
And that allocation gets bigger and bigger. Or even like the SDR, although like as if the IMF would ever sub in Bitcoin with their SDR. I
Right.
I don't know. I think they know it takes away the power from them, but maybe under the table they might do it
Yeah.
if they see the writing on the wall. I'm not sure. I think it's going to take quite some time, and I think we'll see private currencies backed by Bitcoin before we see central banks doing it.
Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
guess we'll see.
of course, nobody knows. I agree that it'll probably be covert before it's overt. But the funny thing about Bitcoin is that the game theory plays out on every level. And central banks aren't. I don't. At least to my mind right now, I don't think they'll be immune to that either. They'll see what's happening and they'll recognize the importance or advantage of getting in before XYZ central bank. And I think that
Yeah.
might have a powerful impact on how quickly things spread. But
My hope is because Canada, our central bank, doesn't have any more gold. We liquidated all of our gold, and it was gone as of I think a year ago, which is
mhm.
crazy. My hope, and I doubt this actually has been happening, but my hope is that we've been swapping some of that for Bitcoin, but
Right. Well, you
probably
know
probably
what?
not.
You mentioned Canada, and did you see the video with Andreas Antonopoulos in front of the Senate Banking Committee in Canada? I
Oh
think that
yeah,
was 2013, 15,
14,
14.
14.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Which in hindsight, that seems pretty progressive of them to have him in front of them. I mean, the kind of best communicator of this stuff in the space in front of them at that early stage. I mean, we see the U.S. now, and they're just kind of getting started on their hearings. So
yeah.
maybe behind the scenes, the Canadian government is progressive on this, and they'll surprise us all.
I, I really hope so. That would be super exciting for me.
Maybe you'll be in front of them next.
Yeah.
What is the biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
Oh, I'm very fortunate to have not been the subject of uh, anything too catastrophic. We'll say I've had some slip ups, and it's all been a learning process. Some of it was spending and not replenishing or in the early days. Like just the other day on my show, I was talking about how I was using something called Fold, which allowed you to convert Bitcoin to Starbucks gift cards. And then if you didn't finish with the change, you could convert it back to Bitcoin. And so I used that back in the day. And I remember spending 0.15 Bitcoin on a Starbucks meal with myself and my now wife. So like $1,500, like a couple coffees and some
Yeah,
food.
yeah,
Um, I mean, and I'm sure that price point, that number is only more likely to continue to grow and be more depressing. But outside of that, things like um, just making sure that your seed phrases and your keys are all backed up properly and hidden away. Imperfect security is no excuse for no security at all.
right.
Is kind of what I'm getting at. Even if you don't think you're perfect with everything, get start to learn, because
Yeah.
the longer you delay, the more likely it is that you're going to make a bigger mistake down the road. Learn with smaller values rather than waiting until you have a lot. And the other thing I would say is always check old wallets and really double check that you have all your money swept off of them before you get rid of anything. It's not even advisable to get rid of old seeds, I'd say. But yeah, you can make a mistake by tossing out a seed phrase and not realizing there's a few bucks on it, which could later be a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, I think if it makes you feel any better, I think everybody in the space has made the mistake of spending and not replenishing. You just
Yeah.
you buy whatever when it's way cheaper, and like a tenth, 2/10 of a Bitcoin seemed like a sensible spend at the time, and now and into the future you'll look back and be like, oh, damn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's part of the process and part of the fun of all this stuff. Ben, how you doing on time? I want to make sure we don't
Yeah,
go
I'm
over.
I'm all good.
Okay.
No worries here.
Um, how do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he, she, they likely control?
Uh, I think the anonymity and the disappearance was probably the best thing that could have happened for Bitcoin. Um, when you look to every other coin, even if the creator or the people responsible for the protocol have tried to themselves, that separation still is not fully there. Like you look at Charlie Lee with Litecoin, if he sneezes, the price of Litecoin can be bashed around by it.
Right.
And so to have these kind of figureheads front and center is just, it's not ideal. It's completely counterintuitive to a decentralized cryptocurrency to have a specific person or a foundation to look to.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that attracts me to Bitcoin, that essentially anybody can throw out an idea and there's nobody to even really comment on it that has much more clout than the next guy. And it's the community that kind of coalesces on the best ideas. Whereas, I don't know, if somebody throws in an idea for Ethereum and Vitalik says, I don't think that's a great idea, odds are people are going to side with Vitalik.
Right.
You saw it with the fork Ethereum Classic. The vast majority of people go with the leadership, even though you could make an argument that something is sufficiently decentralized. It definitely has an impact in my mind.
Yeah. I agree. I think the immaculate conception, if you will, of Bitcoin is another one of its amazing strengths, and that it was then gifted to the world for the world and all of its users, developers, people that interact with it to define what it becomes.
Yeah.
So that's why it's always a bit, in some of the more contentious dialogues around Bitcoin today. I don't think it's that valid to always defer back to the initial white paper, and
Yeah.
course through it word for word, because it's been upgraded a tremendous amount and it's been changed
Yeah.
here and there, but it's no longer the possession of the creator. The creator
Yeah.
put it out there and said, "Do with it what you will. It's yours now.
Yeah.
I'm out." And
It's
I don't think it could have started better.
Yeah, it's a self-sustaining organism now. And to speak to the coins aspect of it and the control of that person, if
Yeah.
they are, or group of people, if they're still alive, they have control over them. Um, uh, while obviously somebody having control of that many coins and dumping them all at once would be a major concern, it would be also temporary, because in a proof of work system, having wealth does not necessarily mean that you are generating more wealth. You have the amount of wealth that you have. You can choose to put it into certain ventures or build it in certain ways if you're successful at that. But at the end of the day, if somebody holds 1 million Bitcoin and wants to dump them all, sure, that will drop the price significantly, but they get that ammunition once
Hmm.
or however long they decide to draw it out. But eventually, that ammunition dwindles to nothing.
Yeah.
So the impact on the system is very much limited. If it was proof of stake, it would be an absolute disaster because that person holding that much coin, that percentage of the system, continues to generate just an asymmetric amount of the monetary base forever,
Right.
and they will forever have the majority of the money and grow it from there.
Yeah.
So that's why I think proof of work is valuable because it doesn't matter if somebody has a lot because they can only do with it what they can do with it.
Yeah. Agreed. What do you enjoy the least about working, interacting, engaging in this space?
uh, I will say that one of the things that I enjoy the least is also probably one of the strengths of the system is if you say something that is off base, you will get eviscerated. and and so I see it, I work with a company called Bull Bitcoin that is very kind of Bitcoin maximalist and in your face. And so I'll see things on our Twitter, and I'm usually the guy that's got to kind of deal with it. And I'll see, like, I work with Francis Pouliot, who's a very outspoken Bitcoin maximalist, and he'll call some people out on something that are typically like, pretty good guys in the in the Bitcoin space, and I'll be
You have to smooth it
looking
over.
over like, oh my God, what is happening? But at the same time, that's kind of Bitcoin has bred this battleground where, like I said, the best ideas are fought for. And I think in the end, that's not a bad thing. What people view as anarchy from the outside looking in is actually just a very in your face way of getting things done and coalescing on those great ideas.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't hold up, then it doesn't hold up and you move on. I think that's just the nature of the system. And while it gives me some mild heart attacks from time to time, I honestly think that the system is better for having that method of governance. It's messy as hell, but man, it works.
Yeah. Agree. At what price would you permanently sell over 75% of your Bitcoin? I think I know the answer, but interesting to,
75%.
yeah.
Oh man, no way. Uh, no, I think, um, I mean, I am a very long-term thinker, and to date, I haven't really sold. I've purchased some things via websites in Canada we have something where you can essentially pay your bills with Bitcoin if
Yeah.
you choose to do so. And I bought like the odd thing here and there, but more or less like I'm living pretty modestly, and I just sit on my Bitcoin because I think there's a lot more to play out.
Hmm.
And if it were to get to a point where I could I could easily live for and keep in mind I've got a family too, so
Sure.
I don't want to give my wife a heart attack either. But I would never sell 75%. No way. Because it'll get to a point where I don't need to sell it. I can just use it if
Hmm.
if it pans out, and I'm okay with that loss if it doesn't pan out. But would I eventually sell maybe like 10, 20, hurts me to say 30%, maybe. Yeah. If I see like a few $100,000 Bitcoin, then sure, I could take a little bit out and live for a few years and basically do whatever the hell I wanted. Um, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but more or less the vast majority of Bitcoin, I prefer to have skin in the game
Yeah.
and watch this play out.
And that way of thinking probably partially accounts for the way that Bitcoin has been growing, right? These big parabolic moves and then a drop off. And, it's understandable for people to say, well, if I sell some of my position, I can buy a house, or I can, not work for a few years or something like that. So I get it, but
Yeah.
the question is a bit of a trick question, just to kind of see, conviction levels and how people think this is going to play out. Because another thing that's just so awesome, unique, whatever you want to call it, about Bitcoin is like most people are of the opinion that whether or not they part with individual Bitcoins, but like you said earlier, that they always replace. Like it's almost like it's this thing that they don't ever want to part with, really. They don't
Yeah.
ever want to see the account balance going down in
Yeah.
Satoshis or in Bitcoin or whatever you value it in.
Yeah.
Which is funny
And I
because it's
mean,
like, well, why do you hold it if you're never ever going to sell it? It's like, I don't know, but I can't let go of this stuff.
yeah. Well, eventually it's a point where you have no choice, because you just aren't unable to get your hands on the amount of Bitcoin that you once had,
Right.
if you want to enjoy any sort of an elevated amount of living, or you don't want to work as much down the line. When you think about a lot of these Bitcoin OGs that came into Bitcoin early and have big stacks of Bitcoin, none of those guys today would ever be able to buy the amount of Bitcoin they have.
Sure,
It's
sure.
impossible.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think many people will get to that point where they're sitting on enough Bitcoin that they would never be able to, with their regular jobs, purchase what they have.
Mm-hmm.
Their savings have outgrown their regular lifestyle, and at that point, it becomes. I mean, you utilize it, and you just admit to yourself that, okay, it's grown enough, and I start enjoying the fruits of what was my risk that I took.
Right, right. Um, have you ever purchased other coins? If so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
I have, and I think people so I am a Bitcoin maximalist, and especially I've leaned a lot more that way the past couple of years here. But I think everybody kind of goes through that okay, there's Bitcoin, and then I hear about this and that and this and that. And you want to play around, you dabble, and some people lean heavily that direction, or think that something else will replace Bitcoin. But in my experience, I experimented, learned, and I kind of whittled down why I was here and what qualities I think were necessary in a coin to merit me being interested in it, for the reasons that I got into Bitcoin. And I just those bullet points, I don't see any other coin holding up to those standards. And so I've very much centered myself back around Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't hold out anything other than Bitcoin. I have in the past, but even when I did in the past, I was pretty damn conservative. I think at my utmost, I had my 10% of my crypto allocation was in other coins,
Right.
and 90% was still in Bitcoin.
And I think I know the answer, but are you likely to purchase other coins in the future?
Not likely.
Right.
I'm not saying that I would like. I'm not saying that I wouldn't like be playing around with an app, figuring out how something works and have
Sure.
something in it, but odds are I'm 99.99% of my time and money is going to be in Bitcoin, unless I just happen to need to do something quickly, but probably not.
Yeah. I think there's probably several reasons, but the fallout from the ICO boom in 2017 and maybe early 2018, I mean, many people got burned, and I think a lot of people coming back to Old Faithful now, just thinking like, okay, I got
Yeah.
greedy, or I was convinced of this, that, and the other thing. But people are really coming back to see the strength of the fundamentals in Bitcoin now, and I think that's represented in the market cap dominance and just the general vibe of things. It seems, like and I'm sure I suspect will always exist in kind of a multi-coin world, because I don't think I think I don't know how it's going to play out, but I don't think they're all going to disappear. but I think probably the dominance of Bitcoin will continue to increase.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at let's step back and look at something like gold versus silver.
Hmm.
And over time, we've actually kind of seen the monetary properties of silver diminish more and more versus gold over time.
Yeah.
And barring manipulation here and there, but I think you'll see a similar effect with Bitcoin. It will gradually siphon value from other coins, and it's not that they won't continue to exist or perhaps have some niche functionality that Bitcoin has not yet implemented
Hmm.
in other layers, but as far as a sound money that will have the best and most often used use cases. I think that it will be Bitcoin and then the rest that are kind of a long, less useful tail.
Yeah.
We'll say.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I suspect as well. What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If none on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
Contrarian. It's funny because you get yourself into this Bitcoin space, and the entire Bitcoin space is a
Right,
contrarian
right.
view to the rest of the world.
Uh-huh.
So it depends on who I'm contrarian to. When it comes to, I think some of my contrarian ways would be contrarian to the way that a lot of Bitcoiners handle certain things. Um, and I've kind of found myself dabbling in both lately, but I think by and large, the best way to deal with people that doubt things or that believe the alternative, I think it takes actual conversation to make them consider your point of view. Being dismissive, well, in a way, serves a purpose. At the same time, I mean, Twitter is a terrible example because nothing can get done on Twitter. But like in actual person to person conversation, um, if you're dismissive, then there's no point in having a conversation whatsoever,
Right.
right? Um, but if you can understand how somebody got to their line of thinking, then you can understand, assuming you're right, if you are right, then you can understand what point or what bit of information led them down that path, and then you can focus in on that and have a conversation on that and see if there's a switch that you can flick to get them to see your point of view at the very least. And if you can't, and if you discover that you're wrong, then you also discover an error in your line of thinking and help yourself turn around. But that conversation needs to be had to make any progress. And if you don't have that conversation and you just are going back and forth, trading blows, then what are you really doing?
Yeah.
You're not changing any minds. You're just wasting your time.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and this kind of points back to what I asked earlier about the Schiff and Pomp debate, because that kind of seems to be the dynamic there. And as you just mentioned, I think a good conversation is where, especially if it's a conversation where you're kind of picking apart something or or you have opposing views, is that both people should put their belief in escrow basically for the conversation, and then
Mhm.
and then obviously have attempt as much as possible to understand the meaning of what the person is saying, their opponent is saying, and then if ideally you both come away with an enhanced understanding. But if it ends up being that there's kind of one person makes more of a rational, logical argument and kind of, for lack of a better purpose, wins, it's like that their belief should be released out of the escrow and allowed to kind of be adopted by the other person, but so often, especially in Twitter, because it's so easy to be a keyboard warrior or whatever, but so much, it's so adversarial a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And like you said
I heard
before, a part of that is I like the Bitcoin community for being so, like, you can't be sensitive. Like, people are gonna
yeah,
tell you you're wrong, and that's good. But when it gets to the point where there's something else going on other than debating the merits of a given subject, then obviously that's not helpful to anyone. But what were you going to say?
Uh, in respect to the kind of the idea escrow thing, I was listening to a podcast the other, I believe it was on Stefan Livera, and he was talking to 100 million USD, the guy on Twitter. But they were talking about they love the idea of potentially down the road having like almost like a GitHub repository for science related articles,
Yeah,
where it's not like this study was done and it determined this and that's just going to stay there. It's more along the lines of this study was done. It's here. If you see something wrong with it, you can submit a pull
I
request.
love
And
it.
it's this ever evolving kind of line of thinking as real science is.
Yeah,
And yeah, I really liked the idea.
I like
It may
that.
not have been that particular.
No,
Yeah.
I could, I sometimes when I kind of go down any given rabbit hole with all this stuff, I get so excited by some of the possibilities, and something like that is there. And let's say a group of people on the network wanted to devote funds to that, so you get this honeypot that's devoted to this particular scientific endeavor or research or what have
Hmm.
you, and there's $50 million that's been devoted to it, and it's open source, and people are contributing their findings, their research, what have you, on an ongoing basis. You're like, holy shit, like that would really be a game changer. And there's a million of examples of that kind of stuff that I think is going to
Yeah.
probably be a part of our future as a result of this stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy because I mean, Bitcoin in itself is kind of that, right? It's a scientific question of how should money work,
Right.
and it's open source, and people are some of the greatest minds in computer science have coalesced on this idea,
Yeah.
and we get to watch it grow in real time and see how it impacts our society. Really
Yeah.
cool.
And people are voting in the most consequential way there is, which is with their limited resources, with their money, and it's amazing.
Skin in the game.
Yeah. Um, Do you believe there are any reliable ways at spotting a paradigm shift? If so, what are they? This kind of goes back to what we were talking about with, people that don't quote unquote get it, and even perhaps us to varying degrees in different ways, but any ways that you think a paradigm shift can be spotted, any telltale signs?
That's a tough one because I mean, I, a lot of the time it's super easy to spot it after the fact.
Of course.
It's you look back and you're like, wow, that was fast. What happened?
Right.
And I mean, and it sounds stupid, but one of the ones for me was uh, one day everybody had flip phones, and then like the next year, if you didn't have an iPhone, you were an idiot. And I was like, and I was like, what happened? That was so fast. Everybody just all of a sudden has computers in their pockets. Like that was like a year,
Yeah.
and it was just out of fat. If anybody pulled out a flip phone, you're like, yo, go back to 12 months ago. It was so quick.
Yeah.
And so honestly, I think it's really difficult to spot because in a way it happens so quickly for the majority of people. However, I think that a lot of people right now in Bitcoin, we're we're very much entrenched, and we see and pay attention to the news around it very, very closely. So
Yeah.
for us, that paradigm shift as it happens, if it does indeed happen, we're going to be sitting here being like, oh my God, what took so long? Because we've been sitting around with it for years now,
Yeah.
and it's still slow to catch on. But the rest of the world, when it shifts, it'll kind of be like, oh, okay, well, we're using this now. I mean, it makes total sense. And if you see somebody doing things the old way, you'll be like, what are you doing? No,
Right.
this is how we do it now. But for the rest of us, it'll be like, yes, finally. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, so I do think it's going to kind of mirror that same kind of. It seems sudden for almost everybody except for the people that were deep into it.
Yeah. What I always find fascinating, and I think, as you said, if you're in this community ecosystem or space, then you have spotted it and you're involved in it. But what I was never. I mean, I've basically come to crypto Twitter like over the last couple months. I've just
Yeah.
never. It was never a thing for me. I was interested in Bitcoin, learning about it, speaking to some people about it, but the Twitter component, like I just couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
And I now that I'm in there, I'm like, holy shit! Like this is this is like a dungeon or a tower. There's
Oh,
just so much. I don't dungeon has a negative, but I just mean there's like it's
it's a little
there's
bit of a
well,
dungeon.
yeah, but there's so much going on. Like there's so many people, there's so many, and everybody is like uber passionate, obviously, right? Everyone's
Yeah.
like, screaming it from the mountaintop, and it just amazes me that like if you're not in that, that doesn't even exist to you. Like to most
Yeah.
people, when they check their Twitter or in their whatever media they consume, like even echoes from that chamber don't reach them. And
Yeah.
it's amazing that, and I mean that's a comment on how our media is both self and is curated by us and curated by others in society today, and how much there is going on that you could, if you're involved in one thing, you could easily be insulated from something else huge going on over here. But
Yeah.
I'm
It's
just like, if you're not involved, it doesn't exist. But when you're in it, you think it's the only damn thing there is. Like it's the whole world, right?
Yeah, it's eye-opening. Like all of us were looking at the Senate testimony and all the stuff with Libra and the references to Bitcoin in the recent. So like I feel like we're everything and focusing on every little tidbit that happens in the mainstream media. But to the average viewer, it's just another blip on the news that the bear notice.
Yeah, exactly. So when we see that kind of stuff, everybody gets excited, or they, like, oh, this is the big move. The the institutions are coming, or this and that, or government's finally taking notice. And to anybody outside of it that you might ask, I mean, it's a non-event. It's another
Yeah.
blurb in the news that they probably mostly ignore. You know.
Hmm.
Anyways, I digress. Let's see. Do you believe there are any? Oh, sorry. Do you have any morning routine? If so, what is it?
Morning routine. Oh, taking a page from Tim Ferriss here, are we?
Well, yeah, I mean, somewhat yes, but I've always been a crazy morning routine person. And I actually saw on Twitter you the other day, talking about health and wellness and fitness and stuff.
Yeah.
So, what do you got?
Ooh, so for me, I mean, it varies from day to day because some days I'm taking my daughter to daycare and that switches things up. But uh, if I focus on my more successful days, I'll sit down. I'll eat first. I'll take a little bit of time to just kind of relax and check out some news items,
Get on
whatever's
Twitter.
interesting to me. Yeah, yeah, just take a quick peek at notifications, which is a bad habit I need to get rid of. But actually, when I kind of ignore that noise in the morning and I just kind of, get rid of the notifications, I find if I have some breakfast and I write out a list of things that I want to do that day, and then prioritize my day as in terms of most to least important, and also carve out time for thing. I tend to separate it out for, okay, today I need to do these things for work, these things for my channel, which I consider separate from my job, and these things for me specifically. And I always try to make uh, you know time for at least one of each, and I designate if I could only do one thing for each of these little subdivisions, and that's all I got done today. What would I be most satisfied in having completed?
Hmm.
So one major work project, one thing for my channel to benefit it, and one thing just for myself for building myself. Whether it be I'm going to spend half an hour reading a book, or I'm gonna, get out on a nice bike ride across the city and get some exercise or whatever. What am I spending time on myself, on my job, and on my, kind of personal hobby slash project of my own?
Yeah. And did Twitter help you out with any health and fitness related advice the other day?
You know what I'm doing now? So I've done a bunch of things. I tended to like things like P90X in the past. I've done those programs a few times.
Yeah.
I just got again from Tim Ferriss, because I've been on a Tim Ferriss kick lately. I got the book The 4 Hour Body,
Hmm.
and it talks a lot about the most efficient uses of your time when it comes to eating and exercise and everything like that. I'm going for a body composition test on tomorrow to
Hmm.
see like body fat versus lean mass and everything. And I'm gonna try and for the next 4 weeks, I'm gonna test that out, test kind of upping my eating. Very very specific types of exercises and like maxing myself out to the point of failure and just kind of seeing what can happen.
Yeah. Uh, how do you define success? We're almost there.
How do I define success?
Yeah.
That's definitely shifted for me. It used to be a specific fitness level, a specific place to live, a specific amount of money and wealth.
Yeah.
Now that has shifted um, to focus more on, I guess, automating certain things. So like finances, I've very much been focused on the last little bit, trying to automate everything so I
Hmm.
don't have to think about it, and it just gradually kind of does its own work. When it comes to when it comes to my personal life, though, it's actually carving out time to do the things that I'm excited about, whether that be in work or just in my free time. But you know, why does anybody work? Well, typically it's so that you have time to do the things that you want to do, or so you have the money to do the things you want to do.
Right.
If you don't make time for that now, then you'll never make time for it.
Yeah.
Uh, you'll just get caught in that kind of rat race. And so I've been trying to focus more on carving out time for myself each day a little bit, and then having specific days where it's like I'm not going to think about any work related stuff, including my own personal kind of channel work,
Yeah.
and just do what I actually want to do. You know, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to go for a bike ride. I'm going to hang out with the family and go to the zoo. You know, I'm going to plan a trip. So taking the things that you think you need to do in retirement and just doing them now.
Right.
You know, in spurts whenever you can.
I couldn't agree more, man. Where or who is your go-to place to learn more about Bitcoin?
Um, hmm, Good question. You know, I try to do a lot of reading as much as possible. But I've been starting to read more of Nick Zappo's blog.
Hmm.
Really enjoy a lot of his stuff. I like meeting people in person and having conversations when possible. I went to Bitcoin 2019, met a lot of great people there,
Cool.
and that was awesome.
Yeah.
Um, but other stuff, I mean, Savadine has a new course online that I've been kind of looking into. But honestly, it sounds counterintuitive, but I go on Bitcoin Twitter and I see what kind of articles are being shared,
Yeah.
and I'll actually go and read those. There's a lot of other great YouTube content creators. There's just so much out there. But you know, see what other people are reading,
Yeah.
and make sure it's not just fluff. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff on like Medium and YouTube that is 100% free that
Yeah.
you can find. And then as far as actual interviews, I love listening to anything on Stefan Livera. He's really good. Uh, Honestly, the guys at Tales from the Crypt, TFTC, Matt Odell and Marty Bent,
Yeah.
they have got solid content and solid guests. And then I actually really like what Bitcoin did with God, what the hell is his name now?
Peter McCormick, right?
Peter McCormick.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I find he's got a really nice approach that it lends itself to newcomers, where it's like the basic questions get asked.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it for the questions. This last section is just word association, right? So I'll say a word,
Okay.
you give me what pops in your head.
Yeah.
Satoshi Nakamoto,
Gone.
government,
Gone.
hash rate,
Rising.
the individual,
Flourishing.
oh, security,
Building.
stacking sats,
Continuously.
fiat currency,
Burning.
Altcoins.
Burning.
Pizza.
Delicious.
Libra.
Trojan horse.
Ooh, gold.
Diminished impact.
And of course, finally, Bitcoin.
Solid.
Well, Ben, that is the end of the not so rapid fire questions after an hour and 10 minutes of going. Um, I just before I let you go, I want to touch on a couple of things about the work that you've been doing because, I've never considered, I've always enjoyed making content, but it's always been to scratch my own itch. So I've never really felt like it was an obligation or anything, but I've obviously watched a lot of the videos on your channel, and you seem to be very consistent. And now you're doing, or for a while you've been doing the daily thing where you're updating about recent and relevant news. I just want to know like a little bit of insight about what the practice of being consistent with creating content is like or has been like for you.
Um, to be honest, I've been surprised that I've kept it up. It can get exhausting at times. Like when I
Right.
started the channel in 2016, I just said to myself, okay, once a week, every week, I need to do a some sort of a video. Doesn't matter what it is, and every Monday there'll be a new one. And so I don't know what it was, but a switch flicked, and I just did it. I just said every month I have to do this. Like, and I knew if I stopped, then I just would never come back to it. So more or less, I haven't stopped in 3 years
And does
more.
does the obligation suck any of the fun out of it, or does it just kind of morph and change, and it becomes it changes, or does
Yeah.
it become
So
like a job that you kind of like sometimes don't want to be at it?
yeah, sometimes. To be entirely honest, there's some days where I just don't want to make a video.
Right.
And some days now that I do the dailies, some days I just don't. But I do make a concerted effort to ensure that I'm getting out a number of videos a week. What I found is I I try to really only cover content that I actually give a shit about.
Right.
Um, if I find I'm forcing something that I don't want to do, I won't do it anymore. And part of the reason that I started doing some news stuff was one, I wanted to up the frequency of content, but two, I got a little disillusioned with the tutorials. In that so I started reviewing like products. So, somebody would send me a hardware wallet because I wouldn't review coins because I don't want to shill ICOs and pump
Right.
and dumps. So I just outright refused to do that. But some companies would be like, hey, we made a hardware wallet. Can we send you a sample to do?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it got to a point where I had like a stack of hardware wallets and I was like, oh my God, is this what the channel becomes? And and I was like, no, I'm just not, this is no longer a thing. If I don't want to review it, then I'm just going to refuse.
Yeah.
And so now I've started to focus on if I do a video of a tutorial, then it's got to be something I'm passionate about. So two that I did recently, which were some of the first tutorials I've done in a while, were the cold card wallet and
Wasabi.
Wasabi wallet.
Man.
Yeah, and so those two, I was beyond excited to finally pump those out because I was like, oh, I'm stoked about these. These are great to use and it's
Yeah.
something exciting. And so I created those and I put them out and I was proud to put them out. It wasn't like whatever wallet this is, I guess. So focusing on things I enjoy, and not only that, but with the news, I'll kind of go through and I'll pick my articles of the day that I find interesting. And then as I'm reading through them, if I'm getting partway through the article and I'm like, this is kind of a nothing article, and I just, do I want it to? And then I'll just hit the X on the tab. I'm like, screw it. I don't like that story. I don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
and I just won't. So yeah, trying to put the focus on things I care about is helping a lot.
Well, I'm sure you have probably realized and experienced this yourself, but I mean, in this media landscape where it costs nothing for anybody to just press record and publish something, like the authenticity is so key and it's so obvious, and I think a lot of people, and this is kind of another question, but a lot of people came into the space in 2017, right? People online doing videos and all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot have subsequently left because they were only there because it was easy attention, let's say, for the time being. But I think a lot got in on a very transactional basis. Like I'll make a tutorial about a Trezor and it'll get 100,000 views, and that's great for me. I can monetize it or I can build on it or something like that. And I think the ones that stuck around, you being among them and others, is there was something more. Like, yes, it's helpful for you to try to educate your audience, but people that are scratching their own itch but doing it in a way that kind of brings their audience along with them is, that's what people come for. Because the whole reason why, one of the main reasons why people are interested in this kind of new media landscape is because there's far less bullshit. You don't have to listen to a guy, with a tight tie on and a suit speaking at like a low voice and read off a teleprompter. You want to hear like what people are actually thinking and, what their lives are actually
Yeah.
like and the mistakes they've made and the things that get them excited. And I think in an attempt to like compete in that landscape and gain attention, people end up reverting to what they think people want to watch, and that might be effective short term, but I think it has a short shelf life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. At the end of the day, if you don't like what you're doing, you're not going to do it for long. And people can kind of tell when something is just for the money. Um, yeah, and I think I had the added benefit of starting the channel at a time when nobody gave a shit at all what I was doing.
Yeah.
So it's clearly, it took forever to get 100 subscribers.
Yeah.
And so I was just excited when somebody would comment. I was
Right.
like, oh, so somebody watched a video and then took the time to ask a question. Amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely came from a place of I'm just going to do this because I enjoy it. And so I want to try and keep that spirit to it over time, as I'm sure people that have stuck around have the same kind of sentiment. If they made videos through the entire bear market, then they're in it for something other than the money.
Right. Yeah. 100%. Ben, last question. What's the origin of BTC sessions? I saw like one of your early videos, and I think it might be related to music because you were performing music, like a jam session of sorts, and BTC was somehow integrated, like it was also an education party for Bitcoin or something, or
I'm impressed.
or for artists to get paid. Sorry, an easy way for artists to get paid. Disintermediate the platforms.
You did your research, the
Damn
origin
right.
story. So originally I was trying to find my niche of how the hell I could fit into the Bitcoin space, because I was like, I can't code.
Right.
I'm not going to develop an app. I'm not an economist. So what can I do? And so I have a background in the arts, and I know a lot of performers, and I've performed before. And I was trying to put together, I ended up doing a couple events at home here at just local venues. And the way we did it is we got a bunch of local artists to put on a show. But each artist would have pictures of them around the venue with an overlaid QR code. Anybody who bought a ticket would, by default, when they walk through the door, be taught how to set up a Bitcoin wallet and receive $10 worth of Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin could be donated to the artists on stage throughout the performances just through the QR codes.
Cool.
In between, we talked about Bitcoin and kind of how it worked. There was a Bitcoin ATM there so people could play around. And so it was kind of like a learning party with live entertainment in between. And so that one was called the Bitcoin Sessions, in relation to like, I don't know, there's like AOL sessions and stuff. There's lots of sessions-esque music type stuff that has happened online over time. And so that was kind of the inspiration there. And then as I kind of lean towards education myself, I just kind of I changed to to make it a little simpler, and yeah, just went with BTC sessions, and then went from there. And that actually that stuff was way back. Like that was like my third video or something. And I actually did it on my other old YouTube travel channel. First, I had some Bitcoin stuff that I was doing before I made this new channel.
And so, did you end up doing any more of those types of like music and education sessions, or was it a one-off? Was it a one-off?
We did two. We did two of them. And I mean, they were both a lot of fun. I think it would be cool to revisit that down the line. There was a good number of people that came out to them, but yeah, I think there's something to be said for artistry coming together with Bitcoin, and I've seen it a lot with like physical art. But I like the music side of things too, and I think it'll be cool to see that kind of come to fruition over time. Same with dance as well. I think that could be interesting.
I mean, it's gonna affect everything. So it'll be cool to see what kind of a marriage takes place between this new tech and social phenomenon and dance, art, music, whatever. Is there much of a community in Calgary, like at this point? Sorry, I said Edmonton earlier. You're in Calgary, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm in Calgary. As far as Bitcoin goes, it's growing. There's Calgary is very kind of, there's a lot of, I guess, white collar kind of stuff here. It's corporate leaning stuff. So there's still very much this kind of blockchain lean on things.
Right.
However, again, like the company I work with for Bull Bitcoin, it's just full on in your face maximalist. And so we Trojan horse ourselves into a lot of these blockchain meetups and help try to be like, yeah, you did say that thing, but also there's this legitimate point here. So I mean, like we just try to plant those seeds so that, you know, a group full of corporate CEOs are not going to take kindly to somebody kicking in the door and being like, everything you're talking about is bullshit. But if you can plant those seeds of like, hey, these are some of the key points that make Bitcoin important, and then they look at those key points and they see that they're not carrying over to project X that they're looking at, they may start to put it together. And that's kind of the goal there.
Yeah, cool. Well, Ben, look, I really appreciate you giving me the hour and 25 minutes that we've been recording now. I seem incapable of going under an hour, but I do really appreciate it. And you are actually the first guest, the first time I've done one of these recordings. So thank you very much for participating in the inaugural episode. Not that there's going to be too many people tuning in at this stage, but do you want to direct people anywhere, YouTube channel, Twitter, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me YouTube at BTC Sessions. There's like 3.5 years of content there that you can check out. I'm on Twitter at BTC Sessions, and I have a website, which is btcsessions.ca. So pretty much BTC Sessions anywhere, you'll find me.
Awesome. And I noticed that on your website, you do workshops, individual workshops or group workshops and things like that?
Yeah.
Is that part of your mix?
So so I do like one-on-ones. So if somebody gets, just typically I try to send people to content I've already created. But if somebody is really like, I need somebody to hold my hand through this, or I need like a one-on-one back and forth series of questions, then I do that for people if they want to book me. So,
right. Yeah. And so that's btcsessions.com.
.ca.
Sorry. All right. Well, Ben, thank you very much again. Wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I'm sure, or actually I hope we have the chance to do a proper sit-down face-to-face meeting or interview someday. But until then, 100%. I wish you well and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I'm glad I could come on.
Cheers, brother. Take care.